A little girl trying to learn to live with diabetes did not get the help that she needed from her parents. That's according to prosecutors in Indiana, who have charged them both with neglect of a dependent resulting in her death. We are breaking down the case of 12-year-old Alice Bredhold with prosecutor Dave Aronberg. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. 12-year-old Alice Bredhold. She was found dead in her Evansville, Indiana home on July 4th. And this is where she had been living with her mom and dad, Ashley and Brent, two siblings, 16-year-old brother, 3-year-old sister. And authorities say there are only two people to blame for this: her parents. They have each been charged with neglect of a dependent causing death. It's our understanding this is a level 1 felony. Why were they charged this way? Well, in 2020, Alice was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and she was supposed to be managing it by taking a long-acting insulin shot before going to bed every night, plus a short-acting insulin dose before every meal. But apparently, that wasn't happening. Hey everybody, I want to quickly thank Upside for sponsoring today's Law&Crime YouTube takeover. So Upside is a free app that gets you cash back on gas and groceries. And every time I pump gas now, I can use Upside. I mean, why not get cash back when you fill up your tank, right? And yes, this is actual real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you can transfer straight into your bank account. So once you have the Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card. You follow the steps on the app and you get paid. And you can use Upside at places like Shell, Exxon, Mobil, 7-Eleven, Taco Bell. That's just to name a few, by the way. So to find out how much you can earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen and use our promo code LCTakeover and get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code LCTakeover for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. This is a very tough case. It's going to make you angry. It's going to make you frustrated. But we are going to get into some very tough details in this affidavit of probable cause that was filed. Not easy to hear this, but thankfully, we have someone here who's going to help break it down for us, explain the law, explain the circumstances. I'm joined right now by Prosecutor Dave Aronberg, the Palm Beach County State Attorney. My good friend, good to see you, sir. Thanks so much for coming on.
Jesse, great to be back with you.
I wish it was under better circumstances with a case like this, but I have to imagine that when you're prosecuting cases about child abuse or children who are harmed or who are killed, those must not only be the toughest cases to actually handle, but I also have to imagine they're maybe the toughest to prosecute, but some of the most important to prosecute, because you have to set an example here, right? There's, especially with a charge like this, which is a little bit more broad, and it doesn't tolerate any kind of behavior.
They're also the kind of cases that resonate the most in the community. For parents of children, they see this child as one of their own, and they relate to it. Remember the Timothy Ferreter case, with a boy in the box. That was covered here and everywhere, and we heard so much from people in the community. So there's a lot of pressure on prosecutors to get it right and to pursue the charges to the fullest extent of the law and try to get the maximum penalty. So there's a lot of pressure on prosecutors here not to screw this one up.
I'm going to get back to that because of what they're charged with, but I want to go through some of the details here. So a detective with the Evansville Police Department wrote up this affidavit of probable cause for the court. And it lays out the allegations of neglect in excruciating detail. On July 4th, when Alice was found dead at home, apparently her mom said her father, Brent, was out of town for work. And the day after Alice died, Brent posted on Facebook, quote, "I've never had to write anything so painful, and I wish I never had to. Last night, my little girl Alice passed away. We don't know why or how. We're making arrangements for her funeral now, and we'll let everyone know the details once we have them. No parent should ever have to bury their child." Well, that's true, but the problem is, knowing what we seem to know now, that post is especially chilling, because the responding officer at the Bredhold home had indicated to this detective that Alice might have died because of something related to her diabetes. So he questioned Ashley, the mother, about her daughter's condition. The document states, quote, "Ashley said the victim used to use an insulin pump, but they ran out of pods and were waiting for supplies. Ashley said the victim should have had a Dexcom G6 sensor on her arm that would transmit her blood sugar levels to her and her friend's phones. She said the device was dead and the sensor had fallen off the victim's arm, so they hadn't been getting the readings or alarms when the victim's blood sugar got too low or too high." See, the problem with that is investigators said they found 2 new sensor units still freshly in their packaging, unopened, inside the home. Authorities say Ashley said Brent left for his work trip on July 2nd. On July 3rd, Ashley was at her own job all day. She came home at around 6 p.m. but was called back to work, didn't get back until 1 in the morning. Alice and the 3-year-old were both still awake, so Ashley reportedly told them to go to bed, but didn't check if Alice took her insulin shot or not. The document reads, quote, Ashley said it was normal for the victim to sleep late into the day because she stayed up late at night. Ashley said they had plans to go to the river to watch the fireworks with her parents that evening, so she sent her son into the victim's bedroom around 1500 hours, that's 3 p.m., to get her up. The victim had not been seen or heard from all that day. Ashley's son said the victim appeared to be sleeping on the floor in her bedroom and wouldn't really wake up. By her own admission, it wasn't until around 2 hours later, so now 5 p.m., that Ashley went to check on Alice. It says, quote, Ashley said when she called her name, she opened her eyes, but other than that, she wasn't very responsive. Ashley said she feared the victim had high blood sugar. Since the Dexcom wasn't working, remember they had these other units though, Ashley said she had to use a finger stick to get a reading. Ashley said the victim's blood sugar was extremely high, so she gave her 15 units of medicine. So Dave, I can understand a child sleeping late. I don't think it quite adds up here.
There were so many chances for these parents to help their child. There's a school nurse who reported that this is not a one-time event. This is not a one-off, that this child was neglected repeatedly. There were so many instances. You mentioned one where the monitor was found. There were 2 working monitors found in the box untouched, so they're blaming the monitor for not working. That's garbage. And then you have other instances where the parents just seem to ignore signs that their child was in trouble. They were told. So if this was an accident, a one-time thing, I think prosecutors would incorporate that in their charging. But they're going for this very serious charge, a first-degree felony, because of the repeated violations here.
Well, let's talk about that. For putting everything to the side, and we're going to get to it, these other alleged instances of neglect, if you just take that fact pattern in and of itself, would that be enough to convict them on this charge? Or you could say there's reasonable doubt as to what they really knew what was going on.
Well, if the only thing we knew was that the child was on the floor of her bedroom for
But they
2
didn't
hours.
check. They didn't check.
They didn't check. That alone is probably not enough. There needs to be more. If they were good parents and then the child, oh, we just thought she was sleeping, that alone I don't think would result in a charge. But that's not it here.
Because even though Alice appeared to be in a very critical state, Ashley allegedly left the victim in her room, only checked on her, quote, a few times after she gave her the medicine. Ashley said she last checked on the victim about an hour before she had her son call 911, so that's 7 p.m. And Ashley said just prior to the 911 phone call, she went into the bedroom, found the victim still on the floor. She said the victim's body was cold to the touch, that she didn't appear to be breathing. Ashley was emotional and said, I feel like an effing idiot. I should have taken her to the hospital when I found her. So, Dave, there's an acknowledgement here by that statement, if it comes in, that she realizes that she could be at fault here.
That's right. And it's not an intentional crime. But bad things that happen can result in criminal charges even when they're not intended. So you're talking about recklessness here, neglect. Those are all things that can rise to the level of a crime. And that is why prosecutors are charging her here.
I want you to keep that in mind because I do want to ask you later about why they weren't charged with murder or something else, like, whether it's manslaughter or something else. Just keep that in mind. Because now is when the probable cause statement really delves into the investigation that this detective did. And he spoke to all sorts of medical professionals, those who personally interacted with Alice, to get an idea of just how much her parents knew and when they knew. Because Ashley apparently told the detective that Alice had to go to the ER the previous October for diabetic complications. Now, the treating physician put in the notes, quote, I strongly suspect this is because the patient was not getting insulin routinely as prescribed at home. Patient admits to me that she often forgets to check her blood sugar before eating. Parents admit to me that the patient is only partially supervised at home for insulin administration. The nurses did try to work the victim to see if she understood her insulin dosing, and it was clear that she did not understand how to do the calculations herself, which again would be important because that's why you have parents who would check this out. A follow-up appointment found that Alice's blood sugar was still too high, so the family was referred to a pediatric psychologist who could help them work on insulin management. And they went a few times, but then, quote, forgot to schedule. When Alice was in school, the school nurse, as Dave was saying, helped monitor her blood sugar, taking it every morning before Alice ate breakfast at school, then again before lunch. And the document says, quote, Ashley said there were issues they had with the victim's blood sugar being too high at school. So DCS was contacted. That's the Department of Children's Services. And speaking of child services, DCS was called in after Alice was found dead. Makes sense, right? What did they know? Well, 2 caseworkers found that every room in the house was full of trash, that there were insects present. They removed the other 2 children, the 16-year-old and the 3-year-old, from the home. The detective had DCS send him all the assessments and reports they had on Alice, and they sent 6 assessments dating back to January of 2021, all from the school. On February 29, 2024, the school nurse contacted DCS and relayed the following concerns. Quote, Alice is type 1 diabetic, has elevated blood sugars on and off all year. This week, her blood sugar has been over 500 on Monday and Tuesday and Thursday. It was over 400 yesterday. The blood sugar is supposed to be between 80 and 120. This is life-threatening. The father is on the way to pick up. The dad did not say if he was going to take her to the doctor. Has Dexcom so the parents can see sugar levels, but they send her to school anyway. The child said her dad knew she was elevated this morning and that she had ketones in her urine, but he sent her to school anyway. Wow. According to a report from April of 2024, Brent had dropped Alice off at school despite knowing her blood sugar level was off the charts. The nurse said Alice's monitor was beeping, which means the info should be relayed to the parents' phones. Quote, this is a chronic issue and Mr. and Mrs. Bredhold failed to correct this before she came to school. Mr. and Mrs. Bredhold have been talked to about her diabetes, but they do not respond. The victim sleeps in class every day. Sometimes there is a concern that it is unknown if she is sleeping because she is tired or in a diabetic coma. So Dave, there's one thing to say you have knowledge, but they had resources to help them.
And this was a chronic issue. This is not a one-off. This is not a one-time accident. The fact that they've been warned again and again, and really all they had to do is to make sure she had 2 shots a day, and that's it, right? Just monitor and have 2 shots a day. They couldn't even do the minimum of that. They couldn't even go to their appointments, you know, with the psychologist to help them treat their daughter more properly, and yet they're claiming that they were shocked that this happened. No, that's not a defense to say that, wow, I'm surprised and I love my daughter. So that's what prosecutors are looking. They're looking at how many chances do you give parents to do the right thing. At some point, it's not a mistake, it's negligence.
Who is to blame more than not more than the parents, but who is also to blame? Is it Department of Child Services? Is it the school? Because they were getting warning signs about this too.
Well, the school nurse looks like a hero here. I mean, she was trying to speak up. She was giving the right alert. She was saying something after she saw something. DCS is always a target because those agencies, no matter what state you're in, are always underfunded. The workers are overloaded with cases. In the end, the people most at fault are the parents. They're the guardians. They're the ones who are supposed to handle this situation. And also, the fact is that they only had to implement 2 shots a day and just make sure the monitor was working properly, not leave them in the box.
But how difficult is it for the Department of Child Services in whatever state there is for them to get involved, remove the children from the home? At what point? Because if they have assessments since 2021, I know that there's a high burden, right, to remove children from their parents, right? But a high legal burden, right? But when you look at this, you could say Monday morning quarterback looking back, but it seemed to me there was a lot of more warning signs for them.
Oh yeah, and there may be some civil lawsuits, although government workers have immunity up to a certain point.
Right.
You know, the DCS people, yeah, there should be an investigation how yet another child slipped through the cracks. But really the fault here, and that's why prosecutors got involved, is with these parents. I mean, that's why they took away the other kids. Now, it looks like the other kids weren't being abused, but if you did want to take away Alice, it is a high burden. We try not to remove kids from their parents unless there are some egregious circumstances, and it turns out it was egregious here.
You mentioned the school nurse, because according to the school nurse who had been helping treat Alice's diabetes ever since the little girl was diagnosed, she reported Alice's potentially life-threatening situation to DCS on February 29th, and that week, Alice had come to school with elevated blood sugar for 4 straight days. According to the affidavit, DCS was contacted again on April 15th, 2024, when the victim showed up to school with a blood sugar greater than 600. According to DCS records, they closed the assessment the nurse made in February as unsubstantiated on April 16, 2024. That was one day after the nurse called the new report in. But the nurse says after she made her report, she never heard from DCS again and assumed they had a case open. On July 6th, an autopsy was done on Alice, and the forensic pathologist's opinion was that she died from diabetic ketosis. Alice's body showed the evidence of her constant high blood sugar. According to the pathologist's report, quote, the victim's liver weighed 3,550 grams when a normal adult female liver should weigh approximately 1,400 grams. The victim's blood sugar was greater than 500 at the time of her death. Brent and Ashley Bredhold, they were arrested on August 7th, charged with neglect of a dependent causing death. They're both being held in jail on a $100,000 cash bond. I want to go now talk about the law on this. Why are they not charged with murder? Because I'm thinking about that, or something, or some other, maybe manslaughter. But a part of me also wonders, is there an intent here? Because couldn't you make the argument, if they know how serious her daughter's issue was, and maybe they wanted her out of the way, what better way than not to treat her? Now, it might be me jumping to conclusions, but it's hard. I'm struggling to understand how you just ignore this unless you wanted the death of your daughter.
As a prosecutor, you only charge what you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and you'd have to have some real evidence to show that they intended this to happen to charge them with murder. That's a high burden, and if you overcharge this case, you could lose the whole thing. So right now, prosecutors are only going to charge what they can prove, which is neglect of a child that you know has diabetes in this case. Now, the manslaughter charge is interesting. They could eventually charge it under the more serious manslaughter statute, like involuntary manslaughter. I'm not sure, though, if that's going to give you, based on this statute, more time in prison. Now, involuntary manslaughter would be like shooting in the air on New Year's Eve and the bullet comes down and kills someone.
It's reckless.
So reckless that it was like to be expected that someone would be killed.
But
that
think
could happen here.
Again, I didn't look up Indiana law on this in terms of what is the sentencing range, but presuming for a moment if manslaughter was a more serious crime than this level 1 felony, although I don't know, you could say, you could expect this to happen. What did you think was going to happen?
Right, and that's the question, is whether or not that is a more serious crime. Because this is serious when you're entrusted with a child who has a serious condition and you just decide that other things are more important.
How do you defend this? Because my understanding is these kind of child neglect charges are very broad, right? The elements of it are pretty easy to prove. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. So how would you defend it?
You tried to show that they did the best they could. They were overwhelmed. You know, they were struggling. That's why there was trash around. And they were trying because they love their daughter. And you put them on the stand and say, we love our daughter. We made mistakes. Mistakes should not put them in prison. They'd compound the tragedy by taking away their other children, forcing them into prison. Now, obviously, I'm a prosecutor. I'm playing devil's advocate here.
It's tough.
And this is such a gross case that I think that the jurors will hate these parents because they're going to put themselves in these parents' shoes and say, you couldn't even give 2 shots a day and make sure the battery wasn't working in the monitor. You had 2 others in the box, unopened.
Yeah, if this isn't neglect, I don't know what would be. Is this the kind of case where you might see a deal because you don't want to take this to trial if you're them?
Very possibly. Now, remember, there's a privilege when you're a married couple that the spouses cannot be forced to testify against each other. In fact, there's spousal privilege where you can't even get communications between the two of them because otherwise you would want to flip one of them, the lesser of the two that's culpable. But here, because there's marital privilege, spousal privilege, you're going to have to go after both of them. And yeah, maybe they'll cut a deal. But this is where I brought up at the beginning, where there's going to be a lot of pressure in the community to hold these parents accountable because there's probably people who are galled by what happened. They want justice. They don't want anyone to get off with a slap on the wrist.
I know they're innocent until proven guilty. I'm a lawyer. I get it. I will just tell you, this little girl didn't deserve this, and she should be alive today. This is a tragedy. This is awful, and we'll see which way it gets prosecuted. Dave Aronberg, thank you so much.
Jesse.
We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jesse.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us, and as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.